It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, the first round of the Democratic presidential debates are history, 2 nights of it, 2 hours each, more than enough for everybody. And we got to get the doc on the line. We got to get the straight up here as far as the politics of this are concerned. And our doctor, of course, is Stephen W. Schmidt. He's the professor of political science at Iowa State University. Dr. Schmidt grew up in Colombia, South America, and he studied in Colombia, Switzerland, and France. He obtained his Ph.D. in public law and government from Columbia University in New York. And, of course, he's heard, all over the world, every platform and most of the major networks and in different languages, and we're just delighted to be able to visit with him on Podcast by George about these debates. And Doc, welcoming you in here again. I got to tell you, these debates, I'm kind of, maybe other people are like this too, I get very uncomfortable. It's hard for me to watch them. I watched probably most of the first night's round of debates. And then the second night I tried watching a little bit of it, and what makes me uncomfortable is the, somewhat the lack of civility and manners and the what I would consider to be the proper way to conduct a debate. Have you ever given that any thought? Is there any other way to do this where people aren't talking over one another and trying to hog the microphones? And I don't like that.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I have found the debate formats over the last several presidential elections to be organized by news media. In other words, CNN or MSNBC or whoever, sponsors it. And they do it for their entertainment more than they do it for voters to be able to figure something out. On the other hand, the problem this year for the Democrats, last year in 2016, for the Republicans, is there are just too many people who think they can be president, or by running for president, they can up their speaker fees or sell more books or get a job in the next Democratic administration or something other than the fact that they actually believe they'll become the candidate of the party. And I think it makes it tough on people like you and me, and especially people who really aren't interested in politics. They're not going to watch 4 hours, of 23 people, or in this case 20 only made it, yelling at each other and stepping over each other. And some of the questions that were asked, were dumb questions and were poorly asked. And so I don't like it. It used to be much nicer when the party bosses picked the candidates and us and folks just kind of decided, are we going to vote for him or not?
Yeah.
And you know what? The results, Democrats always voted for Democrats, and Republicans pretty much often voted for the Republican. And I'm not sure that this process has improved anything much.
Well, no,
but that's what we have now.
Look at the current president. Everybody to their own opinion,
Yeah.
but we got the worst ever as far as I'm concerned. So the current process isn't working. That what I would like to see happen is the moderators, when the debate starts, they would say, okay, here's the format. These are the questions that are going to be asked, and this is the opportunity for response and all that type of thing. Each one of you has a microphone. See that in front of you? Well, we've got students of Dr. Stephen W. Schmidt right here. Each one of them has a red button for your microphone. Right. If you speak out of turn, if you talk over someone, if you talk too long, if you violate the rules, we're going to click that red button, and you're going to be talking to yourself. You're going to be talking over a dead microphone, and everyone is going to be able to see that because we're on TV. This isn't a radio debate. It's a television debate. And you're going to not only look foolish, you're going to look like to your potential voters that you can't abide by the rules, that you can't play nice, that you can't get along, and that you maybe like to cheat the rules a little bit. Now, you don't want to look like that. So,
Oh, yes, you might want to look like that.
You think so? You think so?
I mean, did Donald Trump follow all the rules?
No, not at all.
Does he follow any rules right now?
Yeah.
And you know his approval rating right now among Republicans, not among his base, but among Republicans, is 90%.
Yeah.
So you know, the thing is, also remember, we opened this very nice podcast with me saying that these debates are controlled, organized, planned, and staffed by commercial news media or by news media, if it's, you know, NPR or something like that, public radio or public television. And their objective is to get ratings.
Oh, yeah.
And if you do that, if you say to them you can't interrupt, you can't yell at each other, you can't lean over and make faces and stuff, they're not going to get even the
viewership goes down.
Poor ratings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the debates aren't even on C-SPAN. And they used to be sponsored by the League of Women Voters and all that type of thing.
Yeah.
Now, like you said, they're a network play. I mean, this is all about revenue, commercial time.
It's about revenue and ratings, Mm-hmm. So when Joe Biden said at Jesse Jackson's event there after the debate the next day, I think, in Chicago, you know, in 60 seconds, you can't really explain what your position was and what you did for civil rights when back in the 70s and 80s. The format just doesn't allow it. And so what I say then is Donald Trump can answer any question you ask him with a tweet.
Yes.
You don't need a lot of time. What you need to do is go straight for what the answer is that you want to give, and you've got to have it ready, and you've got to be prepared for it. And that's the way the world is. And, you know, you don't complain about the format. Just figure out a way to do it in an efficient way. And I think some of the candidates did a better job with that. Others weren't very comfortable with it, and you could kind of tell that in the debates. Maybe that helps people who watch the debates figure out who might be able to deal with, number one, Donald Trump, if they get nominated, and number two, deal with the media, the press, you know, when they start asking questions. So Joe Biden didn't do very well in that regard.
No, and you know that maybe folks think, well, that's kind of a cynical way to look. But I don't think so at all. I'll go one up you on the cynicism. I think a lot of the problem in this country is we are overestimating the American public. I think that's how they buy into these candidates. I think a tweet sometimes is all they're capable of responding to. And I think the optics are huge in these debates. Yeah. You know, this is often called a horse race. And here's what I told people this the other day. You know, you've been to horse races probably. I've been to horse races.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
A real good handicapper, a real good political handicapper, which I'm not, but I would like to be. What do? Well, they go to the workouts before the race, and they watch. And workouts are important. Well, that's like the presidential candidates out on the trail out here making these stump speeches and appearances. Those are the workouts. And then leading up to the big race, you go to the paddock and you make sure that your horse is being treated fairly and that that everything's just right for the race and everybody's getting treated equally because the paddocks are very equal. And then you go to the post parade. And that's where the horses are paraded in front of you, and you make your decisions and choices before the starting flag goes up and the race begins. That's what I think the debates are like. I think we're in the post-parade stage for these debates. And I'm looking at these candidates. I'm looking at Joe Biden. I mean, and since you mentioned him there to get into that to start with, Joe's not looking good. I've heard that from more than – and part of it is just his age. It's impossible for him to look – real strong because he's so old and he has that appearance.
Oh.
Yeah. I heard somebody say it's time to drag his body off the stage.
Well, and that's not true. I mean, and the whole myth, that we need a generational change because older people can't make good decisions and are too conservative and so on is not true at all. Older people are in the world are some of the most successful, dynamic, sharp, hardworking, focused, knowledgeable individuals. And do you want some whippersnapper who thinks he knows everything and waves his arms up around the air to take over the White House? I don't. Now, that doesn't mean that I want, Joe Biden or some older person like Bernie Sanders, but good grief, how old is Warren Buffett? He still makes some pretty good decisions and leads one of the top companies in the world. So, the one thing you left off on the racetrack, of course, the crucial thing, the thing that makes all the difference is if you're handicapping, you need to have a friend in that shady group of characters that's walking through the barn, and you need to have someone who will tell you which horses were drugged and which weren't.
Yeah. Which one got the juice, the Lasix and the Butte? That's great. That's absolutely right. Well,
and I think some of these candidates were drugged.
Yeah, it appeared. I got to tell you, when you look at the post parade, I mean, you go out there and you see which horses look strong, which horses look vital, which horses are acting up before the race. You want to make sure that your horse isn't a Shetland pony. I mean, that's not the horse that you want to pick. You want to make sure that your horse isn't too old. Okay, so Doc, did you really have any opinions changed or perspectives on these candidates? Did you really see anything startling in these debates?
Certainly. Let me put it this way. This is the first round of the Women's World Soccer Tournament.
Oh, yeah.
Whoever won the first two debates, the one day or the other, that was just the first round. There's another round of debates. And then we go through the summer, and we go through the fall, and we go into January, and then we finally get to February when the Iowa caucuses are held, the New Hampshire primary, and so on. So when I say winners, I'm talking about who was perceived as winners and losers and who essentially the media declared as winners. And so I'm going to go with that. The media said that Elizabeth Warren won the first debate. They said that Julian Castro did an excellent job and, was great and would now make a great vice presidential candidate for someone. And I guess I'm going to go with that. I think they did do very well. Elizabeth Warren was the state debating champion in her home state. And she is a professor, and professors really can talk.
Yeah.
We can get up there,
and
you ask us a question, and you ask me a question about nuclear physics, I'll give you an answer. It'll be a great answer, and she knows how to do that. And Julian Castro was a sleeper. We thought he was kind of quiet and not very charismatic and so on. But boy, when they opened up the discussion of the border and border security and detentions and stuff, he knows that better than any of the other 20 candidates up there, and he hammered the rest of them. He knew all the federal laws that he thinks ought to be amended, changed, or dropped. He was terrific on that one. And the second night, there is no question that the highlight of that night or the low light of that night was, in fact, Kamala Harris basically turning to Biden and talking about desegregation and specifically about busing. And Biden was not well prepared to answer it. He couldn't answer it in that short a time. So those were some things that I noticed in the second day. Mayor Pete Buttigieg was very good. He has a calm kind of intellectual, smart, and likable way of answering policy questions. I thought he did a great job. There were all those interruptions on the second night, which were annoying and distracted from us. The losers were obviously Ms. Williamson, who was essentially like a palm reader looking into a crystal ball and talking a lot about love and stuff like that as the way to solve the world's problems, which was fascinating and disturbing, but not, I think, very successful. And so Beto O'Rourke, I think, greatly disappointed. He came out originally as this young, dynamic guy who almost beat, what's his name in Texas, Ted Cruz for the Senate. Well, he didn't come across like that at all. He came across as someone who was not really well prepared to debate. Then I would add that there were a lot of other candidates who were impressive in different ways, had interesting policy contributions to make. Amy Klobuchar was good because she kind of calmed down the radical move to the left, which a lot of the candidates were engaging in, and some of the candidates were basically really left without being able to make their case. And so that is a shame, but on the other hand, that's the way it goes. The news media cannot stand thinking that there were 5 winners. It's got to be one, and Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren were the winners. Now we'll see what happens in the next debate in July.
Let me backtrack a little bit here, and because one of my slogans for my podcast is "Straight Talk, Straight from the Heartland." Maybe sometimes it's nutty talk from the heartland, but I'm looking at Elizabeth Warren. Let's start there. I think one of the biggest things in this election isn't Republican versus Democrat. It's in the Democratic Party. It's the progressives versus the mainline Democrats. And because of that last go-around with Bernie and Hillary, and Warren trying to position herself as a progressive alternative maybe to Bernie, can she win the Democratic Party with her holding Hillary's hand over her head and supporting Hillary Clinton over Bernie in 2016?
No, that was not the question you asked me. You asked me who won the first debate.
Yeah.
I gave you the answer.
Right.
Now you're asking me a totally different question, which is which of these candidates can actually move through the entire process, accumulate enough delegates in Iowa, New Hampshire, Texas, Florida, South Carolina, and Nevada, those are the first states, and you get a lot of delegates now this coming year in February from those states to get the nomination. And my answer to you is that's not clear yet, because I'm looking at what's happening in the House of Representatives, where Nancy Pelosi, who is, strangely enough, I mean, the Republicans think she's a left-wing communist from San Francisco. Well, they do.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, you're right.
And they went after her. She is very liberal, I mean, San Francisco is a very liberal and gay-friendly and everything else. But they went after her, for the entire cycle, and it failed. Every candidate, including our candidates in Iowa, here in the heartland, George, for the 3rd District and the 1st District, their ads against Axne and Cindy were always with Nancy Pelosi in the background. So it failed. So for the Democrats right now, oddly enough, she is the center. She is the moderate. And you've got a lot of very farther left members of the House, not so much in the Senate, but the House. So that division is informative, and you can transfer that onto the debates, because that's exactly what you mentioned is the essentially decision that the Democratic caucus goers and primary voters are going to have to make. And that's, who can we pick? Do we want to go all the way left? And can we win the general election with someone who is very, very liberal and wants to do all kinds of things, which I'd be happy to mention to you in about a minute, and to your listeners, that are worrisome? Or do we want to go with a centrist or even a kind of a conservative? Because, To some extent, they actually have moderates in that field. They've got, people like Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard, and Delaney, who are pretty moderate, moderate to even sort of a little bit conservative Democrats. Or do they want to go with the hotter, more controversial ones that want to really turn the apple cart over? And you're asking me to answer it, and I can't answer it because I think the Democrats are in danger of picking someone who is too liberal and is going to scare away the one group that Democrats need next November. Remember, this thing doesn't happen until November of 2020, the actual election. And that's the independent voters who can swing various directions, and most of whom are not ideologically, so committed. And so that's the challenge that the party has, is to figure out who they're going to pick. Now, I will say this, that nobody thought Donald Trump would get the nomination, and then when he got it, the Democrats were thrilled because they said, well, this guy is a piece of cake. Whoever we nominate is going to beat him, like a dog. And it turned out not to be true. So it could be that the American voters are antsy, nervous, and will go for somebody, let's say, who's pretty far left. But later, and before we end this podcast, I'll mention at least one issue that I think the Democrats are going to have to be very careful with, and if they don't treat it carefully, they're going to lose the election.
Plus I love this word, fluidity. I think that's a word of the electoral process and these debates and polling. I saw a tweet of yours where you brought up an interesting point that I wasn't even aware of as far as polling is concerned, and everybody's looking at polls now, believe it or not. But the LA Times, actually, their polling was indicating a change, that they were seeing this surge by Trump right before the election in 2016. I wasn't aware of that.
Not only that, but I followed that particular LA Times poll, which was a rolling poll that went on month after month. It wasn't just one poll at the end right before the election, like some of the polls that end up being accurate because they were taken 24 hours before the election, and by then, people had made up their mind. But that poll showed Trump ahead in every single night when they did the polling. Not by much, but
yeah.
that to me said a lot. And so we need to be very careful with polls. And also, of course, and your listeners know this, and you, of course, do. Polls are like milk. You put them on the shelf. It's fresh right now. It tastes great. You put it on the shelf, and tomorrow morning or the day after, it's sour. It's no longer good. Polls have a very short shelf life. So I'm looking at the national polling average of Joe Biden. 31% of voters said, in the Democrats said, that they like him, that the ones who are participating in the caucuses and stuff. Well, that's a temporary number.
I wanted to talk to you just a couple of candidates in these debates. Jay Inslee. Now, he didn't get a lot of FaceTime, I don't think, but here's the guy that's and I was thinking of you when I was watching him and thinking of this. Here's the guy that's the climate change candidate and this huge issue, and a lot of people are talking about it, including myself, but it just doesn't seem to have much in the way of legs. It just isn't a sexy subject. I don't know what it is, but climate change is not a big reference point in prior debates and prior election terms, and it wasn't a winner in this debate because Inslee hardly got mentioned.
Yeah. Well, no, and he's a two-term governor of Washington State, where the environment is pretty important. He was a congressman before that. But even in Washington State, there's a lot of anxiety about what kind of climate change-connected policies the Democrats might push on the country in terms of higher taxes for fuel and stuff like that. Climate change is not something that people can but not easily vote on someone for because they're more concerned about health care, they're more concerned about illegal immigration and their jobs. And you can tie in climate change into all those things, but it gets, on stage 2 or 3 of the discussion, it gets too complicated. And so people go, I know there's climate change problems. We got to do something about it. Yeah, maybe these rains, floods, winds, tornadoes, maybe they're related to that. But geez, we got to stop all those illegals coming across the border from Central America and taking our jobs and overwhelming our schools and our clinics and healthcare systems and bringing all the drugs and crime. So what's the Democratic position on that? That's a huge issue for voters, not just for Republicans, not just for conservatives, but in general, it comes up as a very high priority issue. And the Democrats in the debates didn't address that at all. So when Inslee tries to break in with climate change, it's like, okay, climate change is important, but let's first talk about health care. And this is where I think the Democrats are treading on very, very thin ice. The kind of ice that comes at the end of the winter when you still want to go ice fishing and you take a chance to go out there. Well, they're walking out on that ice.
Yeah.
On one of these ponds.
Yeah.
Because when they say they want to take away people's private health insurance, they're nowhere within range of ice that is thick enough to support that policy.
Yeah.
Believe me, I looked at the polls. That is the most dangerous direction to go. And the smartest direction would be to say, we are going to take the Affordable Health Care Act and we're going to fix it. It's not you have a house and the house has got some problems with wiring and a little bit of problems with some termites and mice and, the paint is peeling on some places on it. But the house is a house that I'm living in. Don't come and tear down that house and tell me, well, we're going to build a new house. Don't worry about it. What you want is someone to say, we're going to bring in an electrician and a plumber, and we're going to bring in an exterminator and a painter, and we're going to fix the house. And you continue to live in it. I know it's not perfect, and you got all these problems, but we're not going to tear it down. And that metaphor should be read to every single Democrat, because believe me, if they go in that direction, they're finished.
Well, I've got a sympathetic ear to that because what I tell people all the time is they continue to refer to it as Obamacare, and Obama said people could do that if they wanted to. But this isn't the original plan. This isn't the proposal that Obama had. Obamacare has morphed into this thing that it is, and a lot of that was because of the resistance from the Republican Party and the Congress, and it doesn't bear a lot of resemblance to what it was originally intended to be. So if you got back to that,
most people still get. If they have private insurance, they're still, even though it's expensive, and in some cases it doesn't cover everything, most people, and believe me, for this podcast, because I respect you have a good podcast, and I did the research. in the polls, I specifically looked. A huge percentage of Americans, like 75%, say that they're okay with the health care coverage that they have right now.
Oh.
And if you start messing with that, yes, it can be improved. Of course it can be improved. It's like everything else. Nothing is where we want it to be. Everything can be done better. But don't take away. Remember during the whole 2016 election, the conservatives and Republicans said, big government is really bad. I hate big government, but don't mess with my Social Security and don't mess with my Medicare.
Right.
Yeah,
they like that.
The Democrats need to remember that.
Well, we talked about the major candidates. We're going to go here. We've taken enough of your time today, and I appreciate that. But I wanted to talk to you about the candidate, kind of my pet project, the one that I really liked. We didn't mention because she's not considered to be one of the front runners. Tulsi Gabbard, what did you think of her debate performance?
Yeah. She was good. I think her ads that she's running in Iowa are even better than her debate performance, because I don't know if you're allowed to do it, but she sure as hell should have showed up in combat gear and talked about how none of the rest of you have been, in Afghanistan and other places, and I am an Army National Guard veteran. I know what it's like. Soldiers are my brothers and sisters, and I don't want any more of them dying, and that's why I'm telling you we don't want to get involved in all kinds of adventures in other places, and we ought to be talking to world leaders who might suck us into those things. And there's what I have to offer. But she didn't do that. So, and she's a moderate. I mean, she supported Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primaries, for God's sake.
Yeah, well,
but she had I mean, she's not a right-wing person like a lot of my Democrat friends say. Oh, yeah, she's a right-wing.
Oh, no. Yeah.
She's not. She's not. She's a good speaker, and I thought she did not take advantage. I think if Joni Ernst had not served in the military and pushed her connection to veterans and done the motorcycle rides and the ride and roasts and shown a lot of pictures of her in uniform, she wouldn't have won the Senate seat in Iowa. And Tulsi Gabbard needs to stress the fact that she's got hands-on experience, and, maybe for vice president or, Secretary of State or Defense. But they didn't give her much of a chance. But, of course, she's got this problem of some anti-gay statements when she worked for an anti-gay advocacy
20
group.
or something.
That's going to kill her. That's going to kill her, just like anything else that anybody has done, unless she can basically overcome it the way Bill Clinton overcame, all his, I call them peccadillos, but those are problems. The peccadillos of Bill Clinton, and he overcame them. He overcame them, George, by biting his lip, putting his head down, moving forward, and just talking about the nice things I can do. I'm a good guy. I'm a friendly guy. I'm going to save this country, and I love women. I love women. I love they're nice. If Bill Clinton can overcome that and still get the nomination and get elected twice, then you can always atone for things that you did, that nowadays you wouldn't do, and that nowadays are not acceptable. You do mea culpas. And, oh, Joe Biden should have done a mea culpa. He should have done a couple of mea culpas.
People have come to believe that you can just about do anything as long as you apologize. Just say I'm sorry. I mean, that's the number one thing. It's like, don't worry about what you did. Just apologize for it. I don't buy into that, but that's what a lot of people.
You're not a good Christian.
Right? Yeah. What?
You're not.
Yeah.
You're not. You don't believe in the forgiveness doctrine. And the other thing, it used to be if you really did something bad, that you would, become born again. You would find Jesus, and Jimmy Swaggart still has a show.
I remember Jimmy.
And Jimmy Swaggart was running around with prostitutes.
Yes.
So forgive, if you do it right, you can even be forgiven for saying that you're a Native American when you're not.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren. Well, I guess we'll leave it there. Now, do you expect some of these candidates to drop out before the next debate? Is that the kind of? Some people say several will. Do you think they'll fall off?
No, not yet.
No. And when is the next
more debate?
When's the next round? About a month or so, or?
Yeah, toward the end of July. I don't have the date in front of me.
Got it.
But I'm going to watch it, and we can maybe talk about it when it's over with.
Yeah, I can't wait. I hope they turn off somebody's microphone, which is kind of where we came in. Yeah,
they should do that.
Well, that's great. Well, with us on the Podcast by George live line today is Dr. Stephen W. Schmidt. He's the Lucan Professor of Politics at Iowa State University, and delighted to have him on the podcast today. And as he mentioned, we'll come back and revisit this very shortly, because we've got another year and a half to go here before we get an election. Yep. But for right now, that's another podcast by George.